Seoul in Seoul. Episode 6. Busan. Scene 1. The Internet Reacts. Min-Seo posted the photograph on a Friday evening, and by Saturday morning it was everywhere. Not viral in the manufactured sense, not the kind of everywhere that arrives via algorithm and departs the same way, trending for 6 hours before the machine swallows it and moves on. This was a different kind of everywhere. Older. More honest. The kind of everywhere that happens when a piece of information finds the people who needed it, and those people, one by one and then all at once, understand exactly why they needed it. It moved the way certain truths move, not explosively, but with the specific, steady momentum of a story that has been waiting to be told and has finally been given a door. The photograph itself was not dramatic. That was perhaps the most powerful thing about it. It showed the exterior of a studio corridor, fluorescent lit, unremarkable, and at the edge of the frame, half in shadow, stood a man whose face was not fully visible but whose left wrist was a silver watch. A door beside him, half open, and a date stamp in the lower right corner that Min-Seo had left deliberately, forensically intact, 5 years ago to the month, to the week, very nearly to the day. The caption she had written was brief. She was always good at brevity when brevity was the sharpest tool. It said, 5 years ago, a singer from Busan walked through this door with a 3-octave range and a future, and walked out with a termination clause and a silence. Her name was Han Soo-Yeon. Kang Entertainment has never addressed it. It is time they did. The comments section filled the way a room fills when someone has finally said the thing everyone in the room has been thinking. First cautiously, a few names, a few people who remembered, who said I knew her and I followed her and whatever happened to her, she was extraordinary. Then the K Entertainment community arrived in its full, organized, deeply researched capacity. The people who kept spreadsheets and archived contracts and had opinions about label practices that were as detailed as doctoral dissertations and as passionate as letters written at 2 a.m. They knew Kang Entertainment. They had watched Kang Entertainment for years, cataloged the artists who arrived with enormous promise and departed in quiet, the suspicious consistency of a pattern that had never before been photographed. Now it had been. Now there was a date stamp and a silver watch and a name.
Han Soo-Yeon.
The people who knew her name wrote it like they were recovering something they had been afraid to set down. The people learning it for the first time wrote it like they were receiving it, something handed carefully across a distance, something they understood mattered. Kang Entertainment began trending before noon. Not in the way a label trends when it announces something, not celebratory, not promotional, but in the way an institution trends when its interior becomes suddenly, uncomfortably visible to people who are always standing outside. Ari was in her apartment when it happened. She had the good Seoul Saturday light coming through her window, that particular August morning light that arrived gold and heavy and warm, the kind that made the city look like a painting of itself, and her phone in her hand, and the specific, disorienting experience of watching a world find a story that she had been living from the inside. She scrolled. She read. She watched the number on the post climb in real time, the comments arriving faster than she could absorb them, and she felt something complex and not entirely nameable moving through her chest. Not pride exactly, not fear exactly. Something that contained both and more, the particular vertigo of being part of a thing that has just become larger than any one person in it. Min-Seo had done this. Min-Seo had looked at the folder and the photograph and 5 years of someone else's silence and decided, quietly and completely, that Saturday morning was the right morning for the silence to end. Ari set her phone down on the windowsill, picked it back up, set it down again. The light came through the glass and lay across the floor in warm panels, and the city hummed below, and somewhere in Busan, she did not yet know, A woman with a 3-octave range was also looking at her phone, also reading her own name in the mouths of people she had never met, and feeling something she had not felt in 5 years, the specific sensation of being remembered. Scene 2, Sung-woo's press statement. By midday Saturday, there was a statement. It arrived the way Sung-woo Kang arrived at every situation, precisely, calmly, with the full architecture of a prepared position already assembled before the question was fully asked. He did not react to things. He responded to them, and his responses were always constructed before the need for them had been publicly established, because Sung-woo Kang operated in the firm conviction that the only uncontrollable crisis was the one you had not anticipated. He had anticipated this one. He had been anticipating something like this for 5 years. The statement was beautiful in the way that very dangerous things can be beautiful, smooth, balanced, its joints invisible, every word selected not to inform but to contain. It named the termination of Han Soo-Yeon's contract as a creative and financial decision made in good faith following an exhaustive internal review. It used the phrase mutual agreement twice, each time in a different sentence so that it did not appear deliberate. It spoke of the company's long-standing commitment to artist development and the difficult but necessary decisions that professional management sometimes requires. It expressed respect for Han Soo-Yeon as an artist and as an individual and wished her well in her continued endeavors. It did not mention the file. It did not mention Min-Seo. It did not mention the photograph directly, only noting that the company was aware of recent social media activity and was confident that the facts, once fully understood, would speak clearly on its behalf. Ari read it standing in her kitchen with a glass of water she had poured and not yet drunk. She read it twice. The second time she read it more slowly, the way you read a thing the second time when the first read confirmed that it was exactly as calculated as it appeared, and you were deciding whether to be angry or simply unsurprised. She landed on unsurprised. She had grown up in an industry that was adjacent to this one, and she had watched enough beautiful corporate language wrap around ugly decisions to recognize the architecture on site. The statement was not an answer. It was a door that looked like a door but opened onto a wall. Min-Seo read it at her desk, her tea still going cold beside her keyboard, her 3 browsers still open. She read it once, nodded once, and pulled up the 3rd tab of her folder, the one she had built knowing exactly this would come, the one that contained the counter-documentation, the timeline, the cross-reference dates that turned the phrase mutual agreement from a legal courtesy into a provable fiction. She had not posted everything. She had never intended to post everything. The photograph was the opening note. The folder was the composition. Ji-Hoon read it from somewhere in the building he had grown up calling his inheritance. He did not know which office he had walked to. He had been moving through the building with no particular destination, the way he moved through it sometimes when he needed to think. When the sitting still of his own office became insufficient for the size of what was inside him, he stopped in a corridor. He read the statement on his phone. He read it with the specific cold clarity of a man who has heard his family's truth delivered in beautiful language for his entire adult life and has, finally and irrevocably, stopped mistaking the language for the truth itself. He had heard this language at 19, when the company repositioned its first wave of artists. He had heard it at 22, when a singer from Busan was handed termination paperwork through a door he had been standing behind. He had heard it every year since in the shape of strategy sessions and quarterly reports and the smooth, uninterrupted forward movement of an institution that had decided, a long time ago, that certain kinds of accountability were simply not part of its operational framework. He put his phone in his coat pocket and stood in the corridor for a long moment. The building hummed around him. He did not belong to it the way he had once believed he did. That belief had been dismantling itself for 5 years, quietly, piece by piece, and the dismantling was complete now, and he found that where it had stood there was something unexpected, not emptiness, but space. The particular open space of a man who has cleared away what was false and is standing now in what remains, deciding what to build. Scene 3, Ari and Ji-Hoon, the morning after. They found each other on Sunday in a small café in Mapo, not Hongdae, somewhere quieter, a neighborhood that was going about its Sunday in complete indifference to the weekend's events, a place that had not yet learned they existed. The café smelled of roasted coffee and rain-damp wood and something baked and warm that neither of them ordered, but both of them noticed, because that is the thing about small cafés on heavy August Sundays in Seoul. They insist on being comforting regardless of what you have brought through the door with you. The morning light was gold and slow. It came through the front windows at a low angle and lay across the small wooden tables in wide, gentle planes, and the steam from their coffee rose through it and disappeared, and the city outside moved at the particular Sunday pace that is a city's version of exhaling. August in Seoul had a weight to it, a warm, humid, pressing quality that meant even the air felt inhabited, felt present, felt like something that was paying attention. They sat across from each other, and it was different from every sitting across from each other that had come before, and both of them knew it without either of them naming it. The first time they had sat across from each other, there had been so much distance in the space between them, the distance of professional arrangement, of strategic reserve, of two people who were carrying things they had not decided to share. The second time there had been the slow, careful work of beginning to know each other, the coffee shops and the studio sessions and the rooftop and the admission that the watch had been a clue and the answer to that clue and everything that followed. But this was the third kind of across from each other, and it was different because there was nothing left to reveal. The photograph had been posted. The statement had been issued. The file was with a lawyer. The contract was signed. The napkin song was recorded. The confession on the rooftop had been made. They had run out of things to hide from each other, and what remained was simply the fact of each other, unguarded, clear, a little frightening in its clarity the way all true things are a little frightening. They did not talk about the statement. They did not talk about Sungwoo or the comments section or what was trending. Those things existed and both of them were living inside them, and there would be time for them. But this morning, in this cafe, in this particular quality of gold light, they were doing something more difficult and more necessary. They were just sitting. Being. Occupying the same air without agenda. Ji-Hoon's silver watch lay against his wrist and caught the light in the way it always did, and Ari did not look at it the way she had once looked at it, cataloging, cross-referencing, running it through the database of what she was trying to understand. She looked at it the way you look at a part of someone you know, simply, without calculation. It had moved from clue to artifact to simply a part of him that she knew, the way she knew the particular angle of his jaw when he was thinking hard, and the way he held a coffee cup, and the way his voice dropped a full register when he said something he actually meant. Sound Siri, a pause in the cafe ambient. The jazz softens. A beat of stillness, not silence, but the particular hush that falls over a room when something real is about to be said. She told him about the call from Busan over the second cup of coffee, and she watched his face when she did. Something moved across it, across the jaw, and the carefully kept stillness of a man who has spent years maintaining composure as a professional strategy and is now discovering that composure is different when it is chosen rather than constructed. It was not relief exactly. It was not surprise. It was something in the same territory as both, something that contained the specific quiet of a man hearing that a thread he had been pulling for 5 years has finally, from the other end, been grasped. The beginning of something that might become resolution. The beginning of something that might, in time, become peace. He did not speak immediately. He looked at the coffee cup. He looked at the table. He looked at her. Then he nodded, slowly, and the nod said more than any sentence he might have assembled, because what it said was, I know what this means. I know what we have to do. And I am not going to pretend that I am not ready. Scene 4. Min-Seo has zero regrets. She was at her desk when Ari called, laptop open, 3 browsers running as they always ran, the comments section of the original post still refreshing in the leftmost tab with the specific automatic loyalty of someone who had released something into the world and was tracking its flight not with anxiety, but with the clean, professional satisfaction of a person who had aimed carefully and hit exactly where she had been aiming. A cup of tea sat beside her keyboard, gone cold an hour ago, ignored with the particular disregard of someone in whom caffeine was less a requirement than a gesture toward routine. Ari asked her how she was doing. It was the kind of question that contained other questions, the kind that was really asking, are you scared? Are you second-guessing? Do you know what you've started? Min-Seo's answer arrived without a single beat of hesitation. She said it the way other people said good morning, not as a statement that required defending, not as a position she needed to justify, but simply as a fact she was reporting from a territory of complete internal certainty. She was fine. She was better than fine. She would post it again before the question finished being asked. She had built that folder knowing exactly what she was building it for, and she had posted that photograph knowing exactly what she was posting it for, and doubt was simply not a language she spoke when she knew she was right. And she knew she was right the way she always knew she was right about things that mattered. Not loudly, not with performance, but with the deep, settled, unperformable certainty of a woman who had looked at the full picture from every angle and found it holding. She told Ari what she had always known about Han Soo-Yeon. Not as a revelation, as a clarification. As the thing she had been trying to get Ari to see from the beginning, the thread that connected all the other threads, the origin point of a story that Ari had entered in the middle and was only now arriving at the beginning of. This had always been about Han Soo-Yeon. Ari's contract and Ji-Hoon's file and the rooftop confession and the napkin song and the photograph were all tributaries of the same river, and the river had a source. And the source was a 22-year-old singer from Busan who had walked into a studio corridor 5 years ago with everything ahead of her and walked out with silence. All of it, had always been flowing toward her. Min-Seo closed the laptop. She had read enough of the comments. She had watched the post do what she had known it would do, and she had noted it with satisfaction. And now there was the next thing, because with Min-Seo there was always the next thing. Because she was not a person who spent very long looking at what she had already done when what needed doing was still ahead. She asked Ari, as a formality, not because she did not already know, but because Ari deserved to be the one to say it, whether they were going to Busan. She was already reaching for her weekender bag before Ari answered. She already knew. She had known since Friday evening, when she had pressed the button that sent the photograph into the world, that Busan was the next coordinates and she was going, and the only question had ever been when. The answer, it turned out, was now. The answer was almost always now, when the thing was real enough to be worth moving toward. Scene 5, the call from Busan. Ari called on a Sunday evening with the Seoul night settling outside her window, like something being laid down carefully, and her natural curls loose around her face and falling across her shoulders in the way they did when she was not performing anything for anyone, and her heart in her throat in the specific way that only arrives when something is genuinely real, not the managed anxiety of a professional situation, not the anticipatory nerves of a performance, but the clean, unguarded fear of a moment that matters and knows it. She dialed the number Han Soo-Yeon had sent through Min-Seo's channel, the number that had arrived on Sunday morning with a single accompanying message, 4 words, no punctuation. In Korean that Min-Seo had translated without commentary because none was needed. I have been waiting. The call connected. What Ari heard first was not words. It was breath. A single, long, Deliberate breath from the other end of the call, the particular quality of a silence that belongs to someone who has been waiting for a very long time and has arrived at the moment of beginning and is deciding, with great care, how to start. The breath was not hesitation. It was preparation. There is a difference, and Ari, who was a singer and understood breath as a structural element, as architecture, heard the difference immediately. Then the voice came. Han Soo-Yeon's voice, heard for the first time, was not describable by feature, not by pitch, not by tone, not by anything as simple as warm or low or clear. It was describable only by what it did to the air around it, by what Ari felt in the space behind her sternum when it arrived. There was the Busan accent in it, coastal, a little rounder than Seoul, a geographical identity worn not as performance, but as simple fact. There was the careful measured quality of a woman who had learned, over 5 years, that words were currency and currency once spent cannot be recalled, and who had therefore learned to spend hers precisely. There was something else beneath all of that, something that could only be called dignity, the specific, undiminished dignity of a person who has been silenced and has chosen, in response, not to become smaller. She had not become smaller. Ari could hear that immediately. Whatever 5 years of silence had done to Han Soo-Yeon, it had not made her smaller. She said she remembered the night. She said it plainly, without effect, as a statement of fact that needed no elaboration, and Ari understood that this was because elaboration would have required her to do something with the weight of it, and she was conserving the weight for what came next. She said she had been watching Kang Entertainment for 5 years. Not in the way of someone conducting surveillance, but in the way of someone who cannot entirely stop looking at the place where something was taken from them, who returns to it sometimes the way you return to a scar. Not to reopen it, but simply to confirm it is still there, and you are still here, and both of those facts are true simultaneously. She said she had seen the photograph and recognized the silver watch in the frame and had understood, in the instant of recognition, what it meant that someone had finally found it worth posting. That the finding and the posting were themselves a kind of answer to a question she had been carrying for 5 years without knowing if an answer would ever come. Then she said she would like to meet. The call ended. Ari sat in the silence after and did not move for a long time. She was feeling the specific weight of having heard a voice that had been absent from the world for 5 years and finding it still whole, not untouched, because nothing goes untouched by 5 years, but whole, intact, still possessed of whatever quality it was that had once made it worth silencing. That quality, it turned out, was not something you could terminate with a clause. It was structural. It was in the architecture of the woman herself. And it had been waiting, patient and entire, for someone to finally pick up the phone. Scene 6, Han Soo-Yeon's story. Ari told Ji-Hoon what Han Soo-Yeon had told her, and the scene was constructed entirely through the telling, not the original event, but the echo of it, the way an event exists after it has passed through one person and arrived at another. Carrying everything that the first person carried when they lived it and everything the second person brings to the receiving of it. It had been a Tuesday night. 5 years ago. Han Soo-Yeon had been 22 and had been with the label for 14 months and had been, by every internal metric that mattered, the most promising artist Kang Entertainment had signed that cycle. She had a 3-octave range and a stage presence that producers talked about in the specific breathless way that indicated they were running out of adequate vocabulary, and she had been scheduled to release her debut extended play in 8 weeks. And the sessions had been going well, better than well, and then the meeting had been called for a Tuesday night, and she had attended it with her manager and walked into the room believing it was a production meeting. Sungwoo's team had been there. Not Sungwoo himself. He did not attend these meetings, which was itself a statement about how the family had always distributed accountability, keeping the decisions close and the consequences at arm's length. His team. 3 people in a room that smelled of cold air and very expensive suits, and they had used language that sounded like concern, genuine, warm, carefully modulated concern, and the language had been a contract clause. The concern was the clause. The clause was the concern. They had spoken at length about creative direction and market positioning and the challenge of launching a new artist in a competitive landscape. And every sentence had been a brick in a structure whose purpose was to contain her inside a decision she had not yet been informed she was in. Then they had handed her the termination paperwork with one hand and a settlement agreement with the other, and called it a fresh start. They had used that phrase, a fresh start, as though what they were handing her was a gift. As though the removal of her debut, her sessions, her 8 weeks away future, her 14 months of work, was something that had been done for her rather than to her. The settlement required silence. That was the exchange. The fresh start was conditional on the silence, and the silence was conditional on the signing. And the signing had happened because she was 22 and alone in a room, and the people across the table were very good at their jobs and very practiced at this particular shape of ending. Ji-Hoon listened to all of it without moving. Ari had been watching him as she spoke, not performing the watching, but doing it instinctively, the way you watch a person you care about when you are handing them something heavy, monitoring for whether they can hold it, ready to help if they cannot. But he held it. He held it with the specific stillness of a man who has assembled a careful stillness over many years and is now using it not to conceal, but to contain. To hold the full weight of what he was hearing without letting it collapse into reaction before he had fully received it. He had known fragments. He had heard things through the door he had been standing behind, a raised voice, the particular quality of an institutional closing down, the sound of a decision being delivered rather than discussed. He had known what he had done and had not done when the door opened and she walked out past him, her face already arranged into the particular expression of a person who has understood that they are not going to be helped by anyone in the corridor. He had carried that knowledge for 5 years in the file and in the watch that had been in the photograph and in the quiet, methodical work of assembling everything he knew into something that might someday be useful. But he had not known the paperwork. He had not known what they said to her when the door opened. He had not known the phrase fresh start. He had not known about the settlement and the silence and the exchange that had been dressed up as a gift. The knowing cost him something. It was visible, briefly, in the jaw and in the hands, and then it was recontained. But Ari had seen it pass through him, and she did not look away from it, because she understood that this was part of the reckoning, and the reckoning was necessary, and she was not going to let him be alone in it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, not an apology, which would have been insufficient, which would have been a way of making the story about his feelings about it rather than about the person it had happened to. Something more honest than an apology, a statement, quiet and direct, about what he was going to do now. That he had already started. That there was no version of this in which he stopped. He said it the way a person says a thing they have already decided and are reporting, not requesting permission for, not asking to be validated in. He said it like the decision was a wall he had already walked through and was now simply describing the other side. Scene 7. Ji-Hoon goes to see the lawyer. Monday morning. The Gangnam Law Office. Ji-Hoon arrived alone. No assistant. No driver circling in the basement garage. No layer of Kang Entertainment infrastructure around him. No corporate context. No company credit card in the wallet. No meeting logged in the shared calendar that the company's executive team could see. This meeting existed in none of the systems that governed his professional life because this meeting was not a Kang Entertainment meeting. This was a meeting between a man and the consequences of his own choices, and a man and the consequences of his own choices requires no infrastructure. It requires only the man. The office was on the 20th floor, and the view was what Gangnam views always were, a precise, ambitious geometry of glass and steel and money arranged over a city that had decided, sometime in the late 20th century, to build itself at full volume and had not slowed down since. Ji-Hoon did not look at the view. He sat down. He was early, as he always was, because punctuality had been the only form of control that was entirely his own since childhood, the one domain where the Kang family infrastructure could not arrive before him. The lawyer was methodical and precise and deeply good at her work, which was why Ji-Hoon had chosen her 3 years ago when he first began to understand what he was assembling and to whom he would eventually need to give it. She laid out the case in its current state, the file, which was now formally entered into the record, the pattern of artist terminations across the label's 15-year history, cross-referenced with settlement agreements and NDA clauses. The paper trail that Ji-Hoon had compiled and Min-Seo had supplemented through her own research, and that Han Soo-Yeon's forthcoming testimony would anchor in the specific, irrefutable way that only a first-person account of documented events can anchor in. Institutional case. The photograph, she noted, had already done work they could not have paid for. It had established public precedent, had given a face and a name to what was otherwise a pattern of documented but uncharged conduct, had made the case real in the public imagination before the case was formally filed. Ji-Hoon sat in the room with his hands on the table and the silver watch on his wrist and listened to the full architecture of the thing he had spent 3 years building, and it was different to hear it spoken aloud by someone who was not him. It was larger from the outside than it had appeared from the inside, the way structures always are when you step back far enough to see the whole of them rather than the individual pieces you have been laying, one at a time, in the dark. He was focused in the way he had not been focused in years, not the managed, performative focus of someone who is doing what is expected, but the specific, interior clarity of a man who knows exactly why he is in the room he is in and has run out of reasons to be anywhere else. The lawyer told him what came next, the filing, the formal notification, the timeline. She told him it would be difficult, and it would be contested, and Sungwoo's team would be very good, and they would use every resource available to a company of that size. She told him this the way good lawyers tell difficult truths, not gently but clearly, because clarity is the only actual kindness in the practice of law. Ji-Hoon nodded. He had not come to the meeting hoping it would be easy. He had come to the meeting because it was the right meeting to be in, and ease had stopped being a criterion somewhere around the time he decided that the door from 5 years ago could not stay closed. He stood. He buttoned his coat. He thanked her in the brief, direct way that contains genuine gratitude without making a ceremony of it. He walked out through the office and into the elevator and down through the building lobby and out onto the Monday morning Gangnam Street where the city was in full, purposeful motion around him and the August air was warm and dense and immediate. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment and felt, for the first time in 5 years, the specific absence of a weight he had grown so accustomed to carrying that he had stopped noticing it was there. The door he hadn't opened 5 years ago, the one that had defined everything, that had driven the file and the watch, and the 3 years of quiet, methodical work, was open now. He had opened it. And standing in the Monday morning light of a Gangnam street with the city moving around him and the case officially begun, he found that the open door did not feel like an ending. It felt like a direction. Scene 8. Sungwoo calls Arian. The call came through the official Kang Entertainment channel, not to Ari's personal number, not through Min-Seo, but through the company communication system that she had been integrated into since the signing. The system that delivered her studio schedules and her production notes and her promotional calendar, and that she had, until this moment, experienced as a convenience rather than as what it also was, a structure of access. An assistant. A conference room number. A time, Monday afternoon, 3 p.m., which told her everything about how Sungwoo Kang operated, because 3 p.m. on a Monday was not the hour of an informal check-in. It was the hour of a prepared position. The hour of someone who has been thinking since Saturday morning and has arrived, by Monday afternoon, at exactly the posture he intends to occupy. Ari received the message standing in her kitchen in the same apartment where she had stood and watched the internet find Han Soo-Yeon's name, and her reaction was not fear. This was important. This was the thing about Ari Washington that Sungwoo Kang had apparently not accounted for sufficiently. He expected a certain kind of reaction to being summoned in a certain kind of way, and Ari's reaction was not that reaction. It was not fear. It was not the specific, self-protective anxiety of a young artist on her first international contract being called to the corporate floor of the company that owned her deal. It was something sharper and colder than fear, a heightened clarity, a sharpening of every sense that happened in the precise moment she understood exactly what she was walking toward. Her grandmother had called it knowing your ground. You can walk toward anything if you know your ground. She called Min-Seo. Min-Seo answered before the second ring and listened and then said, without missing a single beat, exactly what Ari needed to hear, which was not reassurance, because Ari did not need reassurance, but information, specific, tactical. The kind of thing that Min-Seo always had ready because Min-Seo had been building toward this meeting for longer than Ari had known the meeting would exist. She knew what Sungwoo was likely to say. She knew what he was likely to offer. She knew the shape of the pivot, and she had built for it, and Ari was to go in and listen to all of it and remember that she already knew more than he knows she knows, and that the knowing is the ground. Ari arrived at the Kang Entertainment building at 2:52 p.m. 8 minutes early, which was its own kind of statement. She was wearing what she had chosen with the specific care of someone who understands that the body is a text and that every room is a reading. Not corporate. Not deferential. Herself fully, deliberately, without apology. Her curls loose and her chin level and the beauty mark under her left eye and the small nose ring and the particular way she carried a room that had been hers since she was 17 years old and first stepped onto a stage in Atlanta and understood, in the first note of the first song, that the room was going to be hers every time. The elevator rose and she watched the floors accumulate on the small digital display, and she did the work that Atlanta had taught her and her mother had taught her and 5 years of performing had taught her. The work of entering a room without giving the room the satisfaction of your discomfort. You feel the discomfort. Ari was not pretending she felt nothing. She was not made of marble, and she had not yet been in the room, but you do not give it away. You hold it in the body, and you carry it the way you carry a breath before a high note, with full intention and no waste. The assistant led her to the conference room. It was large. The table was long and very cold and very dark, and the view from the window was the full Seoul skyline on a Monday afternoon, gold and sprawling and indifferent. Sungwoo was already seated at the far end, the suit immaculate, the posture architectural, his hands on the table in front of him with the specific stillness of a man who arranges himself in space as a deliberate act. He was looking at the door when she entered, which meant he had been watching for her, which meant he was more alert to this meeting than his composure was meant to suggest. She sat. The table between them was very large and very cold and represented everything that was at stake, her contract, her song, her future in this city, the case, the file, Han Soo-Yeon, the photograph. 5 years of a story that had been waiting for this table to appear. Neither of them spoke. For a moment that lasted longer than a moment, the room held them both in the specific suspension of a before anything is said, before the positions are declared, before the conversation that will determine what comes next has begun. The city ran its Monday outside the window. The room waited. Scene 9, Ari doesn't flinch. Tuesday morning. Seoul Station. Ari arrived first, as she had known she would. She was always early when she was going somewhere that mattered, had been since childhood, when being first through the door of something felt like claiming it as yours before the nerves could talk her out of it. She had a weekend bag over one shoulder, not heavy, packed with the specific efficiency of someone who knows the length of what they are doing and does not over-prepare for it. Her natural curls were loose and full and moved when she moved. She was wearing her own face, no performance, no armor. And the beauty mark under her left eye, and the small nose ring, and the expression of someone who had been up since 5 and had not minded, because the morning felt like the right weather for what was happening in it. She bought coffee from the station café and found a position near the departure board and watched it, the scrolling destinations and departure times, the organized poetry of a major station on a weekday morning. Seoul's commuter universe in full operation around her. The station smelled of coffee and bakery and the particular human warmth of a space that never empties, never truly quiets, never stops being useful. The ceilings were high. The light was the cool, even fluorescent light of institutional spaces that have been built for function and achieve a kind of beauty anyway, the beauty of purposeful design, of a space that knows exactly what it is for. Min-Seo arrived second, the way she always arrived, ahead of whatever she was carrying, the energy preceding her by several steps. Good blazer. Rolling suitcase. Already talking before she was fully through the station entrance, not because she needed Ari to respond, but because Min-Seo Park processed forward motion through language, and she was very much in forward motion. She had updates. She had tabs open. She had already communicated with Han Soo-Yeon's contact through the channel and confirmed the meeting point in Busan, and she had already looked up the café, and it had 4.5 stars, and she was choosing to view that as a favorable sign. She arrived at Ari's side with the contained, kinetic energy of a woman who has been waiting her whole professional life for a story this important and is going to cover every centimeter of it correctly. Ji-Hoon arrived last, which surprised no one, because in the 3 days since Sunday he had been the most deliberate of the three of them, the most measured, the most careful with his movements, the most aware of what each movement meant and where it was placing him relative to the history he had been inside for 5 years. He came through the main entrance in a dark coat and the silver watch and a bag that suggested he had packed for exactly this trip and had been ready since Sunday, which was true. He walked toward them through the station crowd, the tall figure, the slightly wavy layers of black hair, the careful and now familiar stillness, and when he reached them, he did not say much. He looked at Ari, and then at Min-Seo, and then at the departure board, and the looking said everything the words would have said and more efficiently. The three of them in Seoul Station, for a moment, simply stood. The Atlanta girl and her Korean-American best friend, and the heir who was not cold anymore, or rather, who had always been something beneath the cold and was now letting the something be what it was, visible and undisguised and surprisingly well-suited to a Tuesday morning train station. They stood in the high-ceilinged, purposeful, generous space of Seoul Station with the city moving around them and the departure board above them and Busan 3 hours ahead of them and a woman waiting there who had been waiting for 5 years and would not have to wait much longer. They moved through the gate and onto the platform. The train pulled out of Seoul at 8:47 a.m. and the city began to fall away behind them the way cities fall away from trains, not all at once, but in layers, the dense inner city giving way to residential neighborhoods and then to the edges, the margins, the places where Seoul becomes the countryside's idea of a city's border. The Han River appeared to the left of them, wide and silver in the morning light, catching the low August sun in broad, flat panels, looking less like a river and more like a sheet of hammered metal, something worked and patient and enduring. It was beautiful in the specific way that things are beautiful when you are moving away from them and towards something else, and beauty is not the reason you are moving, but is simply present anyway, accompanying the motion without being required to justify it. Sari sat at the window and watched Seoul recede. She pressed her forehead lightly against the glass, the coolness of it against the warmth of her skin. And she watched the city she had arrived in 6 weeks ago with a suitcase and a dream, and no knowledge of who the Kang family really was, or what the napkin in her pocket would eventually become, or what a 3-octave range from Busan had to do with any of it. She watched it go. She was not sorry to be leaving it momentarily. She would return to it. But Busan was ahead, and Busan had something Seoul could not give her this morning. Ji-Hoon was beside her. Not performing proximity, simply there, in the adjacent seat. His dark coat folded across his lap and his silver watch visible, and his face turned slightly toward the window as well, not watching Seoul the way she was watching it, but watching it in his own way. With the particular quality of a man who grew up inside an institution that owned a skyline and is now, for the first time, moving away from it in a direction entirely of his own choosing. Min-Seo was already asleep in the seat across from them. The good blazer folded